Cultures of the Silk Road by Professor Iraj Bashiri, University of Minnesota.
I'm Iraj Bashiri, Emeritus Professor of History at the University of Minnesota. I'm happy to offer this course, The Cultures of the Silk Road, in conjunction with the courses in academia.edu. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, I have traveled many times to Central Asia, the Silk Road corridor, and have followed developments in that region very closely. I have devised and taught many courses on the interaction of Muslims and communists in the region, and I have published extensively on the history, literature, and culture of the area. You can Google me or see my academy page or my web page, Iraj Bashiri, one word, irajbashiri.com. This short video will provide information about various parts of the course. Our caravan will leave Chang'an or Xi'an for the Jade Gate and from there to the Magao Caves in Donghuan. From there we cross the Taklamakan Desert, the desert of no return, to the city of Kashgar. In Kashgar we'll study the life of the Uyghurs, a Turkish people, Muslim, and discuss their problems with the Chinese authorities today. We will also go to the Kazakh village of Xi'an, a small village, and experience a day with the Kazakhs. And we'll look at the nomadic life of the Kazakhs at that time. In Tajikistan, we'll discuss the civil war, and also we'll assess the impact of the Chinese One Belt, One Road project on the rebuilding of the Republic of Tajikistan. The Karakum Canal was one of the achievements, one of the legacies of the former Soviet Union. We'll look at the impact of the Karakum Canal on the desert itself, on the ancient city of Merv, and also on the Aral Sea. We'll end the course with a brief history of the Silk Road, how medieval travelers kept themselves informed and entertained, a tragic scene, Rustam and Sohrab, from Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, and a recital of the epic Manas by a monastery. I encourage you to get involved, to be part of the activities that are moving the Silk Road today. Get a new experience and in the process enrich yourself. I hope you will be with me when we start our journey. We'll go from Chang'an to Kashgar. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time on our trip to Kashgar. In this session, we'll learn about the movement of the caravans, their stopping places, and the cultural significance of those places. Imagine we are in the Persian market in Chang'an, City of Peace. The tea route caravan has arrived from the Yunnan province in the south, bringing all kinds of teas. And the jade route caravan has arrived from the western mountains, bringing jade and lapis lazuli and all kinds of other precious stones. Merchants have loaded their camels with small but precious items like ruby, musk, silk, medicinal herbs, spices, salt, sugar, and of course, porcelain. Their assistants are inquiring about the price of gold, silver, ivory, wool, and cotton to see which ones would be profitable to bring back from the west. Before long, the caravan leaves the great city with its massive walls, wonderful market for Western trade, and everyone says goodbye to wine shops, taverns, tea houses, as well as to the shops serving gruel, pastries, and cooked cereals. The last things the merchants see are the Buddhist temples and the Manichaean houses of worship that dot the landscape of Chang'an of those days. From Chang'an, the caravan moves slowly, 20 to 30 miles per day, down the fertile Wei River Valley to the Jade Gate, and from there to the town of Donghua, or the City of Sands, was a major center of Buddhism at the time. It was also the first point of interchange between ancient China and Central Asia. At Donghua, merchants visited the Crescent Moon Lake and the Magao Caves. The Magawa Caves, or the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas, is a major achievement of Buddhist art. Merchants visited the Magawa Caves for prayer and for worship. Merchants going west prayed for safe deliverance before embarking on the journey. Those returning from the west expressed gratitude for having survived the arduous journey. The caves were dug out by monks between the 4th and 14th centuries. Altogether, 492 caves have been preserved. They hold about 45,000 square meters of murals and more than 2,000 painted statues and sculptures. Collectively, they comprise the largest, most richly endowed, and longest used treasure house of Buddhist art in the world. They portray a vivid depiction of political, economic, and cultural interaction between the medieval Chinese and the rest of the world of the time. They also depict the artistic, religious, and ethnic relations of the time, especially fashions prevalent in China at the time. As an example of the type of synthesis of cultures that took place on the Silk Road, consider the following statement about how the fertility goddess Anahita, depicted by Iranian artists, is repeated in paintings in India, Turfan, Chang'an, and Japan.
The beautiful woman under the tree was a goddess from the western lands, a goddess of fruitfulness. In Persia, she was pictured as Anahita, who stood under the grapevines. Further east, the figure appears as the goddess Yakshi, who stands under a mango tree in Baput in central India. And at Turfan, another important stopping place on the Silk Road, the goddess stands under a tamarisk tree and symbolizes the survival of life in the desert. Still further east, in Chang'an itself, we can see a beautiful woman under a tree painted on the tombs of members of the imperial family. And finally, still further east, we can see her again. this time on a screen preserved in Japan, in the famous Shoso-in Imperial Treasure House.
Now the difficult part of the journey begins, crossing the Taklamakan Desert, or the Desert of No Return. Don Juan is located at the eastern entrance to the Taklamakan. To cross the 1,500 miles of dunes of drifting sand, caravans had to carry food and water for both people and animals. By now, they should have made sure that the guides they had chosen in Chang'an and those employed here at Don Juan are knowledgeable and trustworthy. The guides' collusion with bandits or their inability to read landmarks correctly could cost many innocent lives. At Don Juan, the road divides into two, southern and northern. The merchants had to choose which route to take. The southern route went to Miran, Nia, Khotan, and Yarkand. The northern route went to Tufan, Lolan, and Kucha. Both roads were hostile and formidable, and both ended in the city of Kashgar. Major travelers like Zhang Qin and Marco Polo had chosen the southern route. The northern route provided more amenities. Chinese protection of the caravans ended here at Don Juan. A major topic of discussion was how to deal with bandits that might attack the caravan at night.
In the Magao Caves, many scenes from the Silk Road are depicted. Here's one showing merchants who have encountered robbers on their way and who are trying to ransom their lives. The merchants are from Tibet and from other Western lands.
Now, a brief history of the Uyghurs. Originally, the Uyghurs were a relatively sophisticated settled population to the west of Lake Baikal. In AD 480, the Kyrgyz, to their north, defeated the Uyghurs and forced them to move south along the Tian Shan Mountains. Between the 8th and 10th centuries, the Uyghurs accepted Islam and displaced the Zoroastrian and Buddhist population of present-day Xinjiang and settled in the oasis towns around the Taklamakan. In 1204, the Uyghurs voluntarily submitted to Genghis Khan as his first client kingdom. In the long run, the move guaranteed them a prominent place in the Mongol Empire. They became advisors to the Mongol Khans and teachers of the Mongol princes. They taught the Mongols their script, originally Sogdian, based on Aramaic. The Mongol, instead of right to left, wrote it from top to bottom. After 1949, Xinjiang was incorporated into China as an autonomous region. Theoretically, that meant more legislative independence from the central government, but the incorporation divided rather than united the Muslim Uighurs and the Han Chinese. The Uyghurs were opposed to the coming of the Han to their region in large numbers. and they refused to cooperate with the Han Chinese openly. Rather than modernizing alongside China, they insisted on continuing their traditional ways. That meant towns that were without modern facilities, buildings that were not earthquake-proof, and professions that did not meet Chinese standards. Considering that 10 million Sunni Muslim Uyghurs lived in Xinjiang under those conditions, the Chinese authorities decided to impose modernization programs on the region, if necessary, by force. The Uyghur capital, Urumqi, was well taken care of, but not so the cultural center of Kashgar. As a part of their renovation project for Kashgar, the Chinese authorities, in spite of Uyghur opposition, moved 10,000 families of the city's 220,000 Uyghur inhabitants out of the city and demolished their residences. Instead, they built low-rise apartment blocks divided by streets wide enough to accommodate cars. The move resulted in ethnic tension, unrest, and Chinese Uyghur altercations that continue to the present. In recent times, to stem the tide of opposition and to educate the Uyghurs, the Chinese have created a number of re-education or training camps. The two populations' views regarding the camps are predictable. The Uyghurs view the camps as anti-religion and anti-Islamic. They are created, they say, to brainwash the Uyghurs. They complain that over the years the Han have destroyed their mosques and burned their sacred books. They are certain that the Han intend to eliminate Uyghur ethnicity, language, etc. altogether. To destroy their family unit, they say, the Han have placed spies in their homes. As for jobs, real education, and the like, the Uyghurs feel they are second-class citizens in their own supposedly autonomous region. The Han Chinese have a totally different view of the situation. They say they are combating separatism and terrorism, that they are teaching the Uyghurs Han values so that they can function in modern Chinese society, that placing Han Chinese in Uyghur families is to unify the people. The Chinese government insists that there is no discrimination against the Uyghurs whatsoever. All told, it seems that music is the only thing that brings the two camps together. Uyghur music is very popular in China. Finally, the struggle for Xinjiang is more than over preservation of traditional values. Many other factors, including economic and military concerns, are involved. The formidable Taklamakan Desert is now a source of oil and other minerals. Xinjiang is a great agricultural zone, but its agriculture is mismanaged. At least that is the way the Chinese see it. The Uyghurs continue to farm the land using outdated methods and tools. The Chinese think the Uyghurs can be trained properly. They can live in communes, work in brigades, and contribute to the agricultural development of the nation as a whole. They can contribute to the industrial sector by promoting the One Belt, One Road project in Central Asia and beyond. More importantly, Xinjiang has a strategic significance for China. As an outpost, its inhabitants, once trained properly, in cooperation with Chinese authorities, can help secure the nation's borders against China's neighbors, Russia, Kazakhstan, etc. They can be of special value against the jihadists on the Pakistani border. Looking at the interaction between the Han Chinese and the Muslim Uyghurs, it becomes apparent that the Chinese could respect the spiritual needs of the Uyghurs, and the Uyghurs could respect the social and political values dear to the Han Chinese. As long as they act in the manner that they are, however, not only more confrontation is inevitable, but also that it will continue. I will stop here. I hope you'll join me next time when we'll travel to Kazakhstan and live a day in the village of Xi'an. See you then. Thanks for watching. Since 1990, I have made over 12 trips to Central Asia, mostly to Tajikistan. This session is about a particular visit to the Republic of Kazakhstan, especially to the city of Almaty and the nearby village of Xi'an. This is how that trip took shape. In 1991, a young man came to my office and introduced himself as Erlan Sagadiyev, son of the president of the Academy of Sciences of Kazakhstan. He wanted to see if I would be interested in contributing to a project of the Academy. The project consisted of spending the summer of 1992 in Almaty, now Almaty, as the guest of the Academy, and to write an overview article covering the history, literature, and culture of the Republic of Kazakhstan. He emphasized that the overview should be informative and even-handed. After a long discussion, I accepted to undertake the project, and when summer came, my wife and I flew to Almaty. The Kazakhs were originally pastoral nomads. They lived in 3 tribes in the northern area of present-day Central Asia. Between 1731 and 1869, all 3 tribes accepted Russian protection and began to settle down. Both Kazakhs and Russians contributed to a relatively orderly settlement. In later years, the Soviets accelerated the settlement process. The saga of the settlement, Russification, and Sovietization of the Kazakhs is documented in their oral epics, legends, and ritual songs. The first thing that strikes a Westerner in Almaty is the dual nature of the culture. Comprised of almost equal number of Russians and Kazakhs, both languages are considered the official language of the Republic. All instructions on documents, as well as writing on billboards and on shop windows, are in both languages. Recently, English, too, is being taught. Around the city, there are many monuments, parks, and museums associated with the names of Abay Kunanbayev, Mukhtar Aouzov, Chokan Valikhanov, Amangerdi Imanov, and Jambul Jabayev, and many others. Now, Abay Kunanbayev was a poet, composer, and philosopher. He was one of the early promoters of Russian language and culture among the Kazakh tribes. Soviet commentators recognized him as the epitome of progress in dismantling the Islamic Sharia law among the Kazakhs. Abai's approach to the Russification of the Kazakhs was known as Abai's Way. Abai conveyed his message of change to the youth of Kazakhstan through his poems and his music. Another person of interest was the prominent Soviet writer Mukhtar Auzov. He spent the last 20 years of his life explaining Abai's way. He wrote 2 volumes in which he explained Abai Kunanbayev's way or path. They are called Abai and the Path of Abai. Another Kazakh figure who is introduced to those who come to Almaty for the first time is Jambul Jabayev. Jabayev was similarly involved. He was a favorite poet and musician. In 1941, his poetry in support of the socialist movement won him the State Prize. Regarding the treatment that the Kazakhs received at the hands of the Russians, not all Kazakhs were in agreement. For instance, Amangerdi Imanov led the National Liberation Uprising against the Tsar. In 1916, when Tsar Nicholas II did not honor his promise that Kazakhs will not be asked to serve in the military, Amanov rose against him. Later on, he became an active participant in the struggle for Soviet power. This was towards the end of his life, 1917 to 1919. There are many monuments that are dedicated specifically to Kazakh soldiers who were killed in different battlefields in World War II. A particular monument in Panfilov Guards Park and a walkway are dedicated to the memory of the 28 casualties in that war. The average age of the soldiers who were killed in those battlefields is 22, 23. Finally, there are many museums in the city. One of special interest is the Central State Museum of Kazakhstan. The whole history of the Kazakh people is on display in that museum. An item of special interest is the statue of Altın Adam, or the Golden Man, a relic of the days of the Sakas, 5th century BC. It was discovered in a burial mound, or a kurgan, in 1969. After a few days in Almaty, I went to the Kazakh Academy of Sciences to meet with President Kinjgali Sagadiev. The academy is a large building that houses many departments. It is named after Chokan Valikhanov, Kazakhstan's first scholar, ethnographer, and historian. In fact, the Kazakhs themselves refer to him as the father of Kazakh historiography and ethnography. After registering at the entrance, climbing 2 flights of stairs, past a large white statue of Lenin, and through 2 beautifully carpeted halls and decorated walls, I was ushered into President Sagadiev's office. We talked about my trip from Minneapolis, life in the United States, the University of Minnesota, where I worked, my activities at the university, and the like. At the end of the meeting, he said something that intrigued me. There's a custom in Kazakhstan, he said, to ask the guest a particular question. Can I ask you that question? By all means, I said, please go ahead and ask. Is there a single thing, he asked, that the Academy could do for you to make your trip to our republic memorable? If there is, this is your chance to make it happen. This was indeed a difficult question to answer. After some thought, I said, well, as long as you have invited me to Kazakhstan to learn about Kazakh history and culture and to write about it, is it possible to show me Kazakh life the way it was before it was altered by the Russians and the Soviets? He sat back, looked at me intently, and said, "You're asking for the impossible. That way of life came to an end 70 years ago. No one lives in yurtas the way their forefathers did, not anymore." A hush fell on our conversation. Then he got up, went to his working desk, dialed a number, and talked to someone. When he returned to his seat, he said, smiling, "It seems like something can be arranged." Weeks went by. Then one morning, 2 cars and 3 men from the academy came and took us to the village of Xi'an, some distance from Almaty. Several families in Xi'an had agreed to take time off and show us the old Kazakh ways. The men were Iskandar Bek, a young man who served as my interpreter, Absamat from the Department of Philosophy, and Joltos Khan from the Department of Journalism. The host family in Xi'an no longer lived in the old ways. They was fully familiar with the traditions involved. Their sons still took their horses up the mountain for 6 months and stayed with them up there for the duration. In Xi'an, we met a young lady who greeted us in English with a pleasant British accent. Her name is Altın Kız, Golden Girl. I'll talk about her a bit more later. In the yard, we ritually washed our hands. Then we were ushered into a room with a long table in the middle and chairs around, as if for a seminar. The host explained that in the old days, everyone sat on the floor with a pillow supporting their back. But these days, chairs and tables are more comfortable. Even though I was not the oldest male, I was asked to sit at the head of the table, farthest from the door, in the place of honor. My wife was seated to my left, and Joltos Khan to my right. Iskandar Bek, who needed to be close to me to interpret, was placed next to Carol. Absamat was next to Joltos Khan. The host sat next to him. The older ladies in the family who were allowed to participate were at the end of the table attending to the tea. I thought this was a casual arrangement, but I was told that this was a special arrangement for those rare times when a guest of honor visits. There were rounds of tea. Joltos Khan spoke about the legendary lives of Kazakh batters or heroes, beys or noblemen, and bees or judges. He enumerated the names and their exploits. He talked about men and women who had contributed to the shaping of the Kazakh nation. His narration was systematic. He covered the exploits of each group thoroughly and moving on to the next. That's how the Kazakhs have kept a record of their history. After about 2 hours, we left the room to stretch our legs. In the yard, ladies were preparing lunch and children were playing. Each lady had a particular task. The first one made the dough, rolled it out, and cut it into the right sizes. The next one, flatten the roll on the back of a large tray and cut it into concentric circles beginning on the outside. The third, cut the circles into specific lengths and folded them into a particular pattern. The cook, who sat near a vat of hot oil over an open fire pit, put the cakes in the vat and watched them cook on both sides. At about 1 in the afternoon, the main part of the lunch was placed on the table. As we returned to the room, everyone sat in their previous places. The host said grace, which consisted of a few words, including Allahu Akbar, God is great, and running the palms over the face. Then we began eating. There were no vegetables and no fruits. Tea was served with generous amounts of sugar and fresh milk. More milk than tea.
Bazıları aynı aday var. Camilere. Sorma mı? Bizim oğlum çıktı. Bizim oğlum geldi. Burada gelsin. Ona. Ay, yıkıldı işte aslında. Niye o sana? Basını diğer yanına gösterip çizip geçsen. Niye o sana? Şken diğer karankrap koya. Hadi elde sonlar şimdi diyor. Versinler.
That's what they're making the millet. А я вашему только что дала. Получается, это и пища. Магавы вот такая. Слишком Асет пәтеге барады. Тоқасын деп отырыз. Ендері көз бақырып. Вообще қатарынан отырып, ендері қолыңды бұлғап қой. Аузыңа салма қолыңды. Қатеге қолың көтерші. Арасын бұлай қосып Кәрілік әкел болған. Тоқасын бетін алады. Сақылап бұлуға.
Рәшетке кездеп кісасыйды ғой. Рәшетке кездеп кісасыйды ғой.
Бірнеше жүздеген миллион сом ақша бар.
Специально бағып қойды ғой.
Мынау бағыттың машина шықсаңыз.
Соны біз мына жақында Американың посольствосына, Турцияның посольствосына, немістердің посольствосына бар ма немістердің? Солар ма?
Каспийдің бірінші. Сондай иә, продукты ашылған. Елу бірінші жыл ашылған.
Ол да орыстандырудың бір
түрі.
түрі.
Яны қайда саған? Яшықтың басында
After lunch, Abd talked about Al-Farabi and his contributions to medicine, philosophy, and music. He also said that the Kazakh government planned to create a medical university in the name of Al-Farabi and staff it with international teams of physicians and nurses. Kazakhs were, of course, now on their own. During the break in private, Altın Kız talked about her life in the village and how she had studied English on her own and was genuinely attracted to the plays of Shakespeare. More than anything, she was interested in the Stafford-upon-Avon and the Old Vic. At the same time, she was married to a young herder who spoke Kazakh with difficulty. She spent most of her time with her children. Skanderbek and I were talking when our conversation was interrupted by the host who was carrying a sheep. "He's going to kill that sheep in your honor," Skanderbek said. I was taken aback. "No," I said, "that can't be. I won't allow it." "You have nothing to say about it," Skanderbek said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You said it is in my honor. What if I don't want a poor animal to be killed for me?" Skanderbek looked puzzled. Then, in a calm and collected manner, said, "You say that you don't want to accept the sacrifice. Fine. But do you remember what your one request from the president was?" "This butchering is the custom here. 40 households in Xi'an have been asked to host each day until your tour as a guest of honor is over and you become a regular member of the community. Each family is going to kill a sheep in your honor. Are you planning to refuse to accept all those offers too? I had nothing more to say.
Okay, I'm
Gel
ready.
gel. Gel.
Osman'dan bir aparat almasak koy biz. Gerek buyurun. Aha. Ben surat. Ege. Bir geçek.
İndire ver gel indire.
Beni түсіндір.
Tamam al.
Мына жерде жаңа айттың ғой мына әлгі қонақтар келген кезде бір осындай ізет болады, бата береді. Содан кейін жаңағы қой сойылады. Ол кәдімгі
It's in your honor. This ship will be prepared as a national food. And in Kazakh, we do for every guest who came to our house.
Fine. Thank you.
Вашт честь.
Rahmet дейді, рахмет. Өте ризамын.
Çok rahmet.
Ал енді бастайық.
Сойы.
Late in the afternoon, we visited the village cemetery. As usual, it was located on top of a small hill. We walked through the main drag in Xi'an to reach it. A number of Kazakh casualties of the Soviet-Afghan War were buried there. The cemetery for the Russians, too, was there at a distance from the Kazakh cemetery.
Да, здесь, no, so from the that come special project, so and government would take its in his hand because in his memory.
Жоқ, основное это государственный Значит, летом бывали здесь, зимой там. Понятно?
صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. لم يلد ولم يولد.
When we returned, the landlord had singed the head of the sheep and made it ready to be cooked.
Ең үлкен кісілерге соны істеп береді дейді. Адамға жерден бер.
Alma süt koydum bakırda almadım.
Onu көрмей жүр ғой жаңағы.
Men süt жаңа неге koyayım? Adamı süt koymaya kadar. Mına var patlıcan var. Patlıcan da bana uyuşturuyor ki. Burayı kan süt gitti. Kudayım öyle çok karışmaz. Çok güzel. Muna ayak buğum, buğumdan boş. Kumbuğa da verdi bunları. Ben çıktım bu kumbuğa. Tabii bacama kumbuğa. Andaga tağı cilirli.
Nedir bunu da tutup dururuz ekan deydir.
Жаңа кішкене түстігіп.
In the last meeting of the day, I answered questions about life in the United States, mostly about jobs, salaries, best places to live, the weather, and the like. Dinner was served at midnight. At about 11:30, trays of food were brought in and placed in predetermined places on the long table. There were trays full of tomatoes, cucumbers, parsley, and other greens grown in their garden. There were also trays and plates full of meat, ostensibly from the sheep killed in the afternoon, with noodles around the edges. At the end, a special tray with the singed head of the sheep in the center was brought in and placed directly in front of me, its white eyes looking me in the eyes. I sat back uncomfortably. The host asked Absamat to welcome us to his house on his behalf. Others too chimed in. Then I thanked them for giving Carol and me the opportunity to visit their home, especially for going out of their way to recreate the old Kazakh way of life for us to see. Iskandar Bek said, "Professor, as the guest of honor, it is your job to divide the skin on the head among the guests. Before that, however, put your finger in the right eye socket, pull the eye out, and eat it." As if I did not hear him correctly, I said, "What?" He repeated the sentence. I felt overwhelmed. The stress made my hand shake visibly. "Why don't you ask Joltas Khan to do that?" I asked. "He is the oldest." Iskandar Bek said firmly, "He may be the oldest, but he is not the guest of honor." Then, without letting me add a word, said, "Professor, I know this came as a surprise, but consider the case. This family has gone through a lot. They are doing things that in their routine life they no longer do. They are recreating a world that no longer exists." "All right," I said. "It's the way of the land." "Yes," he said, "it is the way of the land." Then, without thinking about what I actually was doing, I thrust my finger in the eye socket, took the eye out, and put it in my mouth. It didn't have a particular taste. Chewing on an olive is the best way I can describe the texture. Iskanderbeg then calmly said, "Now cut the left ear and place it on your wife's plate." I did that. "Now cut the skin on the head and divide it among the people around the table according to how much you like each." And that's how that went.
Burada. Қазір не берген дәрежесінде.
Менің жаңағы неде бауыр иә келе ғой Amin ya Rabbal Alemin.
Респект var da bar stölü var. Şaka gelir.
Sen жатпайсың ба?
Yapışak.
Şu yerde şap.
Ең жақсы жақында.
Жоқ, өзі қалаған жер.
Өзі қайыр қалайсың.
Әйелге құлағын берген жақсы болады.
But it will be better to give for your wife the ear.
Әмейді. Әдейді.
Бұл өзі соны жасынан тез жүргенім.
Ал мұны бірге жеп отырып ұрып кететін
Соның бір көзін алып міндетті түрде өзі жейді.
Then you must take one eye and
Майыменен.
eat yourself.
Қарашығын алып тастайды.
Eye. Yes, this one.
I don't know if I can do that.
Қолмен алсың болады ма?
Ала берсін қол.
шақпенен
Sen neге alып бермедің?
Жоқ,
қас ол кісі өзі кішкене нетсіз
Yes, yourself.
Қарасын жеп қой жүрмейсің.
Then кейін тағы не ал?
соның кейін бір кесіп оң жағындағы отырған адамға береді.
Okay. Then one part you must give to the side to the first man who sit to the right.
The other eye.
To the right is one part.
One
Everyone.
part.
It is him.
Үлкен кеседі. Үлкен кеседі.
One big part. Because he's a big man.
Big part.
Yes. It's very
Tell me
important.
when.
He's
In English,
in
English we say when.
Қашан болғансыз? Қашан болғансыз? Үлкен адам дейді.
Жоқ, түсінбедім.
Түсіндің. Сізге.
Big enough?
Мынау жетеді ма?
Жетеді.
Жетеді.
Енді екінші шашы жоқ адамға осылай кесіп.
One part.
One part.
Так, сам салып бери. Пожалуйста, бери. Не, бери, что ты хочешь? Не, пожалуйста.
I don't know.
Бери, что ты.
Енді шетінен мінекей, шетінен осы адамдарға жеткізу керек.
And every part to every man.
Кішкентайдан берсе де сонда соны жаңағы қатуға дәлдіріп көшіп жатырсың.
Так, саған ну так бери. Менің задачам қандай, кроме перевода?
Андан турап бер.
Я вдвоем не смогу сделать.
Мынаны.
Быстрее. Жибер же. No,
He didn't give you yet.
please. Thank you.
I gave Carol already.
Use the first, yes, of course.
So, I'll take myself some.
Теперь возьму себе, говорит, как тағы не болды ма?
Енді мен сізге бір көзін алып беремін.
And I shall give you myself to you one eye.
It's not that easy.
Это не так легко делать.
Ничего.
No, it's just one big.
Next session, we are going to the Republic of Tajikistan. We'll be discussing the civil war there, as well as the rapid post-war reconstruction that is taking place. See you then. Thank you for watching. This session is about Tajikistan, the civil war there, and the reconstruction thereafter. Now, where is Tajikistan? Tajikistan is located at the juncture of the Hindu Kush, the Tian Shan, and the Pamir Mountains. It's one of the most mountainous republics of Central Asia, and the Tajiks live in the river valleys where they grow wheat and cotton. The Republic of Tajikistan was created as an autonomous region in Uzbekistan in 1924. It became a Soviet republic in 1929 and gained independence in 1991. Population is estimated at nearly 10 million. The capital of Tajikistan is Dushanbe, formerly Stalinabad. Major cities are Khojand, Kula, and Gorgantepe. Unlike the other republics of the Soviet Union, Tajikistan did not become an independent Soviet republic in 1924. Until 1929, the affairs of Tajikistan were administered by Uzbekistan. The Basmachi movement, which was centered in the city of Dushanbe, hampered Tajikistan's progress. Even when Tajikistan became an independent republic, the Tajiks were torn between loyalty to Islam and loyalty to the socialist movement. Those who felt strongly about Islam moved away from the urban centers and lived in the mountains of Karakum in the south. Those who followed socialist dicta remained in the urban centers, expanded Soviet education, as well as Tajik agriculture and industry. Their major achievements included an aluminum works in Yavan and a hydroelectric dam in Narak. By 1940, both the Soviet and Muslim Tajiks had made progress. The Soviet Tajiks had made progress in cultivating large fields of cotton, building factories, power plants, and roads. They also expanded the domain of Soviet education. The Muslim Tajiks built a network of Islamic schools, formed educational ties with Afghanistan, or the Tajiks of Afghanistan, I should say, and prepared the ground for displacing the Soviets from their land, especially from the south. In the 1940s, Stalin was forced to send more and more Soviet Tajiks to the front. In place of those workers, he assigned Muslim Tajiks. That is, Muslim Tajiks who had opposed the Soviet system from the beginning. After the war, many of the Soviets who had been sent to the front did not come back. Those who returned faced stiff resistance from the Muslim Tajiks who now occupied their former homes and jobs. Since initially the Soviets had come to Tajikistan from other places in the Union, they were told that they should go back to their original homelands and find homes and jobs there. The Soviets resisted. They demanded to return to their homes and work. The Muslim Tajiks refused to either vacate their homes or to allow them to work in their previous stations. Before long, argument turned into a civil conflict, a conflict that had to be settled in a court of law. But what court? A Soviet court using the Soviet constitution, or a Muslim court using the Sharia law, Islamic law? The Muslim Tajiks refused the authority of the Soviet constitution. The altercation between the communist and Muslim Tajiks continued with varying intensity. Between the 1960s and 1970s, the state used force to maintain peace. Several small uprisings in the south were suppressed. In response, the Muslim Tajiks set up resistance cells in Tajikistan and recruited Muslims from Afghanistan and Russia to join their cause. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev unleashed the forces of perestroika and glasnost in Soviet society, of course. The Muslim Tajiks used this opportunity to carry out their plan of turning Tajikistan into an Islamic republic. Their efforts plunged the country into a civil war that lasted from 1991 to 1997. Initially, the Islamic Party won. Most of their demands were met, and their leaders were put in key positions in the government between 1991 and 1992. In time, however, troops from Russia and Uzbekistan moved into Tajikistan and put an end to the rule of the Islamic Party. After negotiations in November 1992, a secular, democratic Islamic government came into existence. Imam Ali Rahman, at that time called Imam Ali Rahmanov, was chosen as its leader. My involvement with Tajikistan began in 1990, the last year of the Union. And this is how that involvement started. Movie director Merv Kasimova brought her movie Rah Sapid, or Bon Voyage, to be screened in Minneapolis. I met with her and we talked about various subjects. She asked me if the Academy of Sciences of Tajikistan were to send me an invitation to visit Tajikistan, would I accept? I said I would. In February of 1990, the Academy of Sciences of Tajikistan sent me an invitation to participate in the Barbad Symposium. In April, I flew to Dushanbe. This is Hotel Tajikistan, where those who had been invited to the Barbad Symposium stayed. And those in front are the buses that took the guests to the Academy and back to the hotel. And this is a view of the town in those days from my room on the 8th floor. Even though they had collected all the passports and we were told not to leave the hotel on our own, the next morning I took my small camera and sneaked out of the hotel. I didn't know what the chances of seeing anything beyond the bus trips to the academy would be. The following are some of the scenes that I saw and photographed. In retrospect, before getting to those pictures, I should add that as time went by, the pictures that I took that early morning became more and more meaningful and important. For instance, the next year, the Civil War broke out and eliminated the social structure underlying the society that those pictures depict. Change to a free market economy was in progress. For me, the whole lifestyle of the Tajiks was new. In subsequent visits, I used those pictures as reference. When I stood in the same place and took pictures, I could see whether any meaningful changes had taken place. The fresh rain had given the scene a special attraction. The model of the car and the truck attracted my attention. I was looking for signposts to remember so I don't get lost. People were going to work, children were going to school. This place turned out to be near the bazaar. Keep it in mind. I shall be returning to it again. The person who attracted my attention was a villager visiting town. His hat, his cloak, his shawl, and his boots indicated what part of the region he came from. Some older people, when they realized I was taking their picture, covered their faces. It turned out that they were following the Islamic rule regarding creation of images. After I learned that, I asked for permission before taking pictures. This woman is selling Tajik hats. Here they are selling shoes. There were two sizes. You got one hoping they would fit. If it did not fit, farther away, under the trees, you swapped it with someone who could wear it. Here are two gentlemen. One is more traditional, wearing clothes similar to the first one we saw. The other is a more modern, urban type. Here, there's a mix of people, a good representative of Soviet society of 1990 in Tajikistan. Same here. This is even more interesting regarding the mix of people. As minutes went by, the bazaar got more and more crowded. Then I entered the actual Soviet part of the bazaar. This was a covered bazaar. All its departments were organized systematically with respect to type of product, where the product came from, and the like. This was also the time when free market was moving in. Here are two young men selling kebab. I took many pictures. I will show a few quickly as a basis for comparison for later visits. Here are women selling bread. They have baked this bread at home, and now they are selling it on their own. Here is an herbalist from Badakhshan. You can tell that from the hat he wears. And also there is a villager passing by. Here is where you can buy brooms. Note the lady in full Tajik traditional dress. This last shot, I found out later, was indicative of the riots that had taken place in February, as a result of which many shops had been set on fire. When I returned to the hotel, my colleagues were getting ready to go to the academy. At the hotel, I was met by members of Kino Studio. They said that the academy has invited me on their behalf. They then took me to various places, such as the beautiful Varzov Gorge. These are some of the cinematographers, scriptwriters, etc. from Kino Studio. Marvarid Kasimova, who was in Minneapolis and invited me to Dushanbe, is among them. A lot happened after that, but discussing those issues is outside the purview of our present work. In 1993, accompanied by my wife Carol, I returned to Dushanbe to study the works of Sadruddin Aini. We found Tajikistan in the middle of a civil war. Everything had changed. The chaykhanas, or tea houses, where you sat on wooden cots, drank tea, and talked with your friends as long as you wanted, were no longer either as vivacious or as full as they used to be. The Shah Mansur Bazaar was in need of much repair. Military trucks, soldiers, and militiamen were everywhere. Safar Ali Kenjayev's soldiers had shot their way into Dushanbe. The impact of their actions was visible on the buildings in the center of the town. Water was scarce. We kept our perishables in the tub, in the cold, muddy water that came from the mountains. They were good for a day. Gasoline, too, was scarce. These young men were running a gas station of their own. They had gas in that small canister that they sold to those who needed gas urgently. Milk was brought in a special truck. You had to be in the line early in the morning, lest the milk truck comes. We lived on the 11th floor, and there was no elevator. This scene is the view of the line for milk from our balcony. The following are comparison pictures showing the changes that took place after a peace treaty was signed. They are mostly self-explanatory. The picture on the top left is taken in 1990. The one on bottom right is taken about a decade later. Any other information follows that picture. Since Tajikistan's participation in the New Silk Road and assistance from China's One Belt, One Road project, the pace of renovation has been accelerated tremendously. This small bazaar, called Bazar Rah Abrisham, the Silk Road Market, was demolished. And in its place, a mega market called Saadat was built. The following shows the outside and some of the inside departments of the Saadat market. You could easily trace some of the stores in Saadat to the shops in the old market. There was also much that was new, stuff imported from Eastern markets. In 2016, the same place became the location for a row of new buildings. The following shows work in progress on those buildings. And here's a picture of those buildings completed. Picture taken via satellite. See especially the tremendous growth of the city in general, especially around the location of the old school and bazaar. The alleyways that took me to the market that early morning, the bazaar itself, and everything related to it are no longer there. This square has seen more change than any other place in Dushanbe. In 1990, the statue of Lenin was there, pointing to the peak of communism. The statue of Lenin was replaced by the statue of Ferdowsi. And subsequently, that statue was replaced by the statue of the founder of the Samanid dynasty, Shah Ismail Samani. This is the view of the city of Dushanbe that I took from the balcony of the 8th floor of Hotel Tajikistan. It was the second picture that I showed earlier. The prominent feature in this picture is the ring of mountains that surround the city. The following video is taken from nearly the same place, from a high-rise that in 1990 did not exist. It shows the monument of Shah Ismail Samani, then zooms into the middle of the park and shows the monument to the father of Tajik literature, Abu Abdullah Rudaki. This last video shows the city as it looked around 2016, the last time I was visiting Tajikistan. Note in particular the number of satellite dishes that cover some rooftops. On September 9, 2021, Tajikistan is celebrating its 30th year of independence. The amount of progress made during the last 15 years at all levels is incredible. It's a triumph for the people of Tajikistan, their chosen leader, Imam Ali Rahman, the assistance of China through the One Belt, One Road program, and the contributions of the Silk Road project. This ends our discussion of Tajikistan. Next session, we'll visit Amu Darya, the Karakum Canal, and what remains of the Aral Sea and the ancient city of Merv. See you then, and thank you for watching. This session is about the Amu Darya River, the Karakum Canal, and what remains of the Aral Sea and of the ancient city of Merv. The Aral Sea was one of the 4 largest lakes in the world. It was a major habitat for birds, migratory birds, and 135 species of animals. Its shores were dotted with fishing villages and a network of ports that supported its trade relations with other areas. Its fisheries and canning factories supported thousands of workers. For instance, in 1921, when the people of Volgograd were starving, every single day, 400 wagon loads of fish were sent to them from this area. Seaports like Aral Sea, by participating in the sea trade, brought prosperity to the inhabitants of the fishing villages all around the land. Nevertheless, beginning in the 1960s, steps were taken that resulted not only in the dislocation of those people and the elimination of what they had accomplished, but also in the recreation of a region-wide ecological disaster that will last a long time to come. How did that happen? Here is a brief history. Beginning in the mid-18th century, the geopolitical dynamics of Central Asia, its human and natural resources, attracted the attention of both St. Petersburg and London. Towards the end of the 19th century, a series of maneuvers took place between the two powers. Over time, those activities came to be known as the Great Game. From the south, in India, the British worked their way up north, capturing all the small and large kingdoms in the subcontinent, heading for what is present-day Afghanistan. From the north, after the conclusion of the Crimean War and an end to the Murid Wars, the Russian Empire, except for Bukhara, acquired all the territories in present-day Central Asia. In the late 1800s, the two powers reached the Wakhan Corridor. The Wakhan Corridor is a strip of land wedged between the Pamir and the Karakum mountain ranges. It became the dividing line between the two superpowers of the time. Rather than starting World War I at that time, the two powers agreed for each to retain the territories that they had already gained. They then divided the affairs of the region between themselves as follows. The cultural affairs of the region became the responsibility of the Russian Empire. The political affairs became the responsibility of the United Kingdom. The Badakhshan River, that takes source in the Pamirs, and which, along with the Panj and the Vasht rivers, becomes the Amu Darya, indirectly came into the possession of the Russian Empire. The Amu Darya is one of the only two major rivers that sustain the Aral Sea. The other river is the Sir Darya River. It takes source in Kyrgyzstan as Aksu. In any event, during the Soviet rule, almost all the water resources to the north of the Panj River became the responsibility of the various republics of the Soviet Union. And all were managed by the committees implementing the 7th and 8th articles of the Communist Manifesto. Article 7 of the manifesto, among other things, talks about the bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with the common plan. And Article 8 talks about equal ability of all to labor, as well as establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. In the 1930s, the Soviets tested the impact of those articles on water resources in Tajikistan. I'm referring to the building of the Vasht Valley Canal, The project was completed in 1933. It not only expanded farmland along the river's lower reaches, but also irrigated vast wastelands, turning them into green fields of cotton. Thereafter, similar projects were implemented on the Sir and Amu. They too went well. The Aral Sea was not affected in any substantial way. In the 1950s, one of the Soviets' main concerns was production of cotton and rice in large quantities. At the time, they were not worried about the consequences of their decisions, not at least in a substantial way. This is when they decided to build a canal in Turkmenistan. The projected canal would be on the fringes of the Karakum Desert and would provide water for the city of Ashgabat. It also would serve as a waterway in the region, as well as irrigate large tracts of the desert. It should be mentioned that before that, Russian Tsars had proposed a similar plan to use water from the Amu Darya, Murghab, and Tajan rivers and create a man-made river to be called the Karakum River. But that project was never implemented. Serious work on the canal began in 1954. By 1967, nearly 520 miles of it was finished. Between 1967 and 1988, the rest was completed. Today, the Karakum Canal is 870 miles in length and is navigable. Many small canals along the way are used to irrigate vast fields of cotton, vegetables, melons, and other crops. The canal is also a boom to the industries of Turkmenistan, especially fishing and livestock raising, including raising the Karakum sheep. No doubt, the canal has brought prosperity to Turkmenistan, but it is at the expense of two other regions in the area. The diversion has caused the Aral Sea to lose its water. Similarly, the subterranean water created is threatening the well-being of the ancient city of Merv. The following are some of the pros and cons regarding the canal. On the positive side, the canal has provided annual employment for nearly 2 million workers. Large number of people have come from different areas to Merv, Murghab, and Charjur to aid in the production of cotton, wheat, etc. The canal is providing drinking water for the people of Ashgabat and other cities in Turkmenistan. On the negative side, the canal has destroyed Aral and the livelihood of the villagers who live around the lake. It has destroyed the canning factory that employed nearly 60,000 workers. It has destroyed the tourism that used the boats that now sit on the sand. Most importantly, it has created an ecological disaster. As mentioned, migratory birds and some 135 species of animals have lost their habitat. Loose salts and chemicals in the atmosphere continue to cause infant mortality, throat cancer, kidney and liver diseases, and all kinds of respiratory problems. The lesser known disaster is the situation of the city of Merv. In ancient times, the city of Merv was one of the major stopping places on the Silk Road. Originally, the city was built in the 6th century by the Achaemenids. In subsequent centuries, it became a major center of Buddhism, a center of Buddhist learning like Donghuang we talked about earlier. In fact, Merv is as far west as Buddhism ever came. The ancient city was dotted with many Buddhist monastery temples, the ruins of which in recent times have yielded a treasury of coins and Buddhist art. During the Sassanid era, the city of Merv accommodated people of other faiths, including Zoroastrians, Manichaeans, and Christians. During the Islamic times, it served as the base of the Abbasid rebellion against the Umayyads, as well as the home of the influential Barmaki family. In the 13th century, Merv too, like many other Central Asian cities, was devastated by the Mongols. Today, the magnificent ruins of the city cover a vast area of the desert. These are mostly castles, fortresses, and temples built using mud bricks. The subterranean water from the Karakum Canal is threatening their existence. There is little chance, unless measures are taken, for those remains and the artifacts that they hold to survive. In the next session, our last session, we'll talk about the history of the Silk Road, how the people in the caravan passed their time, and a look at two epics, the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi and the Kyrgyz epic Manas. See you then, and thanks for watching. This final session consists of a brief history of the Silk Road, a Silk Road discussion of religion, philosophy, and science, and a look at the epic tradition on the road. In the West, it is generally believed that Alexander the Great's march to India established trade relations between China and the West. Let us see if that's the case. Alexander lived in the 4th century BC. His army did not go beyond Samarkand in the region that at the present is Central Asia. He even was forced to abandon his conquest of India. His generals forced him to do so. For Alexander, therefore, we can say he opened up Central Asia to the West. He established Western colonies in the East. During the Hellenistic era that followed, those areas grew into prosperous kingdoms. In this way, he also laid the foundation for exchange of ideas between Central Asia and the West. In the 2nd century BC, Zhang Qian discovered what lies beyond the Taklamakan. In other words, he opened up Central Asia to China. More importantly, he convinced the Chinese emperor of the profitability of trade between China and Central Asia. The merchants of the Silk Road connected China and the West via Central Asia. The Silk Road began to decline in the late 15th century after sea routes between Europe and Asia were discovered. In particular, when the Persians began to meet the needs of the West for silk. And of course, when it became clear that the ships could move any merchandise with ease and without danger. The Silk Road was named as such by Ferdinand Freiherr von Richthofen, a professor of geography in 1877. As we said at the start, caravans moved very slowly. Technically, they moved during the day. Well, when the days were hot, they moved throughout the night as well, especially the nights that the stars were out and when the moon was there. During those long hours, merchants of the caravan found like-minded people, or people they thought were like-minded, and engaged them in conversation. Sometimes the discussions turned out to be thought-provoking and uplifting. At other times, they were comical and, for some, disappointing. For instance, the question was, where does this world come from? Depending on whether you were talking to someone familiar with Western or Eastern thought, you heard different answers, often contradictory responses. Some believed that the world has always been there. Some would say the world was created ex nihilo, that is, it did not already exist. And some believed that God created the world in time and out of nothing. Here's another question that was repeatedly asked. What happens to the body after death? Some would say nothing. It turns into dust. Some would say on Resurrection Day, God returns all bodies to life. There were questions about prophets, miracles, revelations, and the like. The contradictory answers intrigued them, but their discussions rarely ended in violence, unless they encountered a heathen who openly rejected that Allah has created the world out of nothing, that the Quran was revealed, and that there will be a resurrection day. On such occasions, the individual was labeled a hated person and was ostracized. Sometimes conversations began on a promising note. For instance, you begin a discussion about Al-Biruni. You say Al-Biruni spoke Persian, Arabic, Hebrew, Turkish, Sanskrit, and Syriac, and excelled in astronomy, mathematics, and history. What is his greatest accomplishment? You're asked. He calculated the circumference of the earth. How can we be sure that his calculations are correct? They are, you confirm, because he based them on knowledge he gained from reading the Arabic translations of the works of the ancients. If he had asked me, I could have told him how many miles. How so? As many as those stars in the sky. If you don't believe me, count them. Our last topic deals with epic on the Silk Road. The following is a well-known tragedy from Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, the story of Rustam and Sohrab. Rustam, Iran's national champion, looking for his horse, Rakhsh, enters the city of Samangan. The governor of Samangan recognizes him and invites him to his house for dinner. After dinner, he asks Rustam to stay the night. Then at midnight, he sends his beautiful daughter, Tahmina, to Rustam's room. Tahmina stays the night with Rustam. The next day, when Rustam is leaving for Iran, he says goodbye to Tahmina and gives her an armband. When our son comes of age, have him wear this armband and come to Iran and find me. I shall recognize him when I see this armband. When Sohrab, Rustam's son, grows up and asks about his father, his mother tells him who his father is and gives him the armband. Sohrab grows in the ranks of the Turanian army and becomes the national champion of Turan. In a war that ensues, Sohrab is sent to the war to defeat the Iranians. In the battlefield, he tries very hard to find his father, but to no avail. The king of Iran had ordered that Rustam's identity should not be divulged. In the battlefield, father and son face each other. Sohrab pleads to Rustam to identify himself, but Rustam expressly denies that he is Rustam. Ironically, Rustam himself suspects that the young warrior might be his son, but dismisses the thought.
اگرچه زدی تو مرا بر زمین دیگرگون ما را بود رسم و دین کسی که بگشتی نبرد آورد سری مهتری زیری گرد آورد نبرد دیگر بایدش
نجیب است آینو هم دینتان همان به بخنجر نه آیت نیاز زمانی بیاسوده بار پیمان کنیم دل از جنگ جستن پشیمان کنیم دل من همه با تو مهر آورد همه آبی چشمم به چهر آورد اگر پوری دستانی سامیالی نجنگیم اگر رستمی زابولی
نه ای نبرد جوان همان به که نامم نگردد عیان که من تا به امروز در کارزار نگردیده بودم چنین شرمسار بکردم از اون نام نیکم نهان نگفتم که هستم جهان پهلوان بعد این شرمساری چو دیدم شکست زیبر گفتنی نام
شکستم چی سام آوری چون سلاح شکسته
اگر بیشکند تیغ خود بخوانند گردان
و بازو درود
و بازوری بازو شکسته میان
نمایند نیروی خود را عیان چی شده جهان پهلوی نامدار و سهراب و جنگش نهی پایدار
قوی پنجه ای جوان
تو را سستی آمد دیگر ز آسمان
بینالم به درگاه کردگار بدین کار این بنده را پاسدار عدوی است اما همه مهری من بجنبد به شرم آورد چهری من گمانی برم این نبرد جوان پوری من بود از خطا الامان همان زور خواهم که از آغازی کار به من دادی ای پاک پروردگار بود جنگ و دیگر بی بخواست بود کامگارا زفر هر کی راست
Rustamo, wo ist das doch nicht du?
آیا تیغ زن تو مشو ناامید زمانه به دستی تو دادم کلید تو زین بیگناهی که این کس پشت مرا برکشید و بزودی بکشت و بازی بگویند همسال من به خاک اندر آمد چون این یال من دریغا که رنجم نیامد به سر ندیدم در این هجر روی پدر از آن نامداران و گردن کشان کسی هم برد نزد رستم نشان که شد کشته سهراب
نشانت رستم نشانت کجاست نشان کو نشان من است پسر را بکشتم با پیران سر بریدم پیو بخیان نامور دریدم جگرگاه پوری جوان بگرید برو چرخ تا جاویدان.
Now, finally, the national epic of the Kyrgyz, Manas. It's about 1 million couplets in length and is recited by Manaschis. Historically, its storyline goes back to when the Kyrgyz defeated the Uyghurs in 840 AD. In 3 parts, it tells the story of the warrior Manas, his son Semite, and his grandson Saitek. About the role of this epic in Kyrgyz culture, Cengiz Aytmatov has said, whereas the people of the other regions have safeguarded their culture and history in texts, sculpture, architecture, theater, and the arts, the Kyrgyz have reflected their worldview, national consciousness, aspiration, and struggle for liberty in their oral traditions. By oral traditions, of course, he meant the epic Manas. Here is a short excerpt from the epic. After Manas's death, Kanike, Manas's wife, tries to protect their son Semite. She sets up a competition among horses. If Taitoro, her aging but strong horse, wins, she will take that as a sign that she has Manas's blessing in deciding how to save their son. Again, here is that excerpt.
Aral Taitoro, 60 sıymalele, 60'ta çağırle, arı attı cürelay, cürür albay kalgan be, aldım tuttak o soyul koy, illin albay algan be, жақсы tap, келдele, jara bir, namiska, jaratkan bir, belgele, jauğunday sayırle, barajat, kokustan, bakayı jelge malınıp, bayqabastan, lokustan, suğuru kazgan yiyimde, kıyağınsız algan be, tuğrana joldu, algan be, ülkün bolgan Taitoro müşkülükü salgan be, үйден ғана басқан арманды қиыр жолға түшкенмі дақыр қызды көзде жеткенмі талайын деген Taitoro шөріп ой ол қайнаған шорбағаны мен біткенмін аяғымдай болғанда 60 түрімді чаппай ойбой не болдым ара бер құрбай келді таппай ойбой не болдым Kuşu Türk tülgüne tatpay koy ev oldum Aylanayım yaratkan Kanlayayım tapayım Kanday yol sallayım Yaratkan canlınım Yalvarım sağlım Cana yol arayın Cana dur sallayın Pivoşen filerleken Hansedağı ünlü şeken Aklanım üzülmeyin Aynıktey olgan gözünden Haykıldın kalgan amana Abdurgunnu düşürmeyin Zeneken olgan kaldelle Cana dur bir sal delle Cana karab tal delle Hoşanda karasa Çalgan attar canlışıp Çavan ettim barışıp Çandı juttuk alışıp Epi tüzgünde çay var Emi oldu karışıp Tulparlarga mayışıp, tuğrulup kellet karacer, tuyaktır, hilelip, yuğrulup kel karacer. Bunu şonu görgönge, çıdap karap turalbay, yemin erinden gana getip, karatır. Oşonda gayran erneken, atamanın kalasa, atpatarın sanasa, Karadeniz boyunda, Karaday vallar yolunda, kara çandan aralaş, kalıncılık tolunda, gele jatat kayranmanın ümittimizi kaşayırıp, oşondan 300 elen attın sonuna. Buna şanı görgönde gayranın en beyt ağlay, muğunu başı şalkıldap, buz yutkanday kalçıldap, bir orunda turalbay, cebir ayna kılalbay, muğunu başı şalkıldap, çımınday canı çıktı. Yeneken ilanın gidi burkurapun Ata düden arman gül Kazandak degen gayran kuş Kayrılbay uçkan taladan Kapıstan ölüm bolon bo Karından çıkan baladan Karılayın Taitorum Kargış tigir mal veren Kayrıma menin jarralan Huşu turgan sevmetey Evin ta gülünü biyeler Yesi yetkemen şordu Ugan emne kendim billeler Hatan degeniz bayım Jate kendim billeler Hatan deşin oşonu Kata kendim billeler Arbağı büyük bölgelçer Aristan mandat kavulan Ata kendim billeler Jırgonum bellin çırkıra Aşkandığım billeler Jorruğumdun içinde Kaytkandığım billeler Yoluman artı belimde Burma basıp medirdi Bu kaldı gözde vurkura Kaçkandığım billeler Kokuyuşum seni tey yolundan varma Valavı yol üstü kime siret. Bugünce olan bu sanalım. İrenimdi kuvartı, içerimdi çuvaltı. İşimdi kadar benim yaram.
This concludes our short trip on the Silk Road. I hope you found it useful. Thank you for watching. Also thanks to Academia Courses for making the presentation possible.